So digital disruption is changing the world into a place that is boundaryless. Here, our next talk will discuss a world with no nationalities and no boundaries, with the topic of bridges over boundaries. Are we in an era of global citizenship? We're very excited to have 4 panelists with us today. Please welcome the head of International Public Relations, e-Residency at the Government of Estonia, Mr. Arnaud Castaignet. And welcome the chairman of the Ancora Foundation, Mr. Gita Wirjawan. CEO and co-founder at Edmund Hillary Fellowship, Mr. Yoseph Ayele. And finally, news editor, anchor, and journalist at Thai PBS, Nattha Komolvadhin, who will be a moderator for this panel. A round of applause for our panelists.
Good afternoon and welcome to very global trendy session of global citizenship. And people must be wondering whether this is the trend among young generations only, or what should be the mechanism, or what should be the policy of government or mindset of people nowadays to become global citizens. Yoseph, I'd like to start from you. You were born Ethiopian, but right now you got permanent resident in New Zealand. What's your path to be here, and do you see yourself as global citizen?
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, and thank you all so much for coming to talk to us. So I was born in Ethiopia, moved around 6 countries. Before moving to New Zealand, I was based in San Francisco working in technology, and I couldn't get a visa to stay in the US. The US gave me a scholarship to study at Harvard, $200,000, but right when I started giving back to the economy, because of my degree and the work that I was doing, it didn't sort of check in the immigration policy. And I realized just how broken immigration systems are in the world, especially in the most advanced country in the world. Something like that could happen. And me coming from a place of privilege, then what happens to all the other people who have got so much potential, but whose potential isn't being valued by immigration systems? So I decided to move to New Zealand because I thought that I could make a bigger impact in the world from a small and agile, flexible place, and experiment things there that you cannot do in other types of economies, because New Zealand is small, it's low corruption, it's easier to do business, and it's very edgy, it's very experimental. And part of my time there, I actually ended up working with government to design a new visa program called the Global Impact Visa. It's designed for global citizens, so people who recognize the interconnectedness of the world, that my actions in New Zealand affects people in Thailand, and your actions here affects people in Indonesia and Estonia, and that we have a responsibility to actually deal with the consequences of our actions. The innovations, the technologies that we build, the companies we develop, have a responsibility. And so the visa program is run as a fellowship program called Edmund Hillary Fellowship, and we bring global citizens to come to New Zealand to solve global challenges from our country.
That's part of what you have been doing to encourage more global citizens to come to New Zealand.
And also create a model. We'll hear from my colleague in Estonia, which has also been creating a different model, but create an interesting model for how a nation state could approach the concept of global citizenship. It's not about just being here or there. It's actually building linkages between places. But it's about also responsibility to say, if I'm an entrepreneur, then I have responsibility to create things that can have a positive impact elsewhere. There's no point creating things that either cause climate change or deep level of inequality. I mean, many of us use iPhones right here. And what is the idea of innovation if you have suicide nets around places where the phone is being created? That is a negative impact. So how do we really think about the indirect consequences of our actions? And how do we change the narrative for what entrepreneurship is so that we create a positive impact through our work?
Arnaud, you were born French, but right now you are working for Estonia government as well in international relations and for e-Residency program.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that? And do you see yourself as one of global citizens?
I definitely feel I'm myself a global citizen. I can totally rely on Yoseph's experience. So just a few bits of my own personal background. I'm actually half French, half Cambodian. My mother moved to France as a refugee. She arrived to France as a refugee. I've lived in many countries around the world, like Belgium, Serbia, Romania, India, Turkey, before I started to work in Paris for the former French president, François Hollande. I was part of his communication team. Then I got introduced to the Estonian Digital Society, thanks to a woman, actually. That woman happened to be the Estonian president herself, who came on a state visit in France, and she introduced us to everything Estonia was doing to better serve global citizens. So that's how I actually moved from working for one government in France to Estonia. So I definitely consider myself as a global citizen, particularly because being a global citizen is not like globalization. It's not about companies, not about business, not about finance. It's really about what Yoseph actually described. It's about shared responsibility. It's about shared values. And this is really, really critical that we all share these kind of values of diversity, of inclusion, etc. And it's also about the idea that you should not be defined only by your own nationality. I mean, you don't choose your nationality. You are born with that, and this should not determine your path and your entire life. So with e-Residency, Estonia is trying to serve citizens from around the world and provide them with more opportunities and with the access to Estonian e-services so that they can focus on their passion, focus on their business, create a company in Estonia, and then be part of a digitally empowered global community.
What does e-Residency stand for? Estonia Residency or electronic?
It could actually be Estonia, but it's electronic residency. And just in a few words, e-Residency is a government-issued digital ID available for anyone from anywhere in the world, allowing people to become e-resident, access Estonian e-services, and the administration in Estonia is totally digitalized, and the main benefit is the possibility to create a business in Estonia and run it remotely from anywhere in the world. So we bring people, we bridge them to the European market and to the global entrepreneurship scene. But the funny thing that we discovered, and this is totally in line with the topic of this panel, is that when we provide people with opportunities, when we facilitate their business, facilitate helping them to focus on their passion, etc., then they don't want to be only passive users of our services. They want to be active members of our communities. They want to discover the culture of the country. They want to learn the language, and I can say that Estonian language is very, very difficult. They want to know about the history. So they want to feel part of this country that for many of them, they don't actually know. Many of them didn't know anything about Estonia before becoming a resident. But we believe that in the future, the soft power of countries will be more determined by the ability to build a global community and engage with them, rather than the size of the population or anything.
How many years of e-Residency program, and so far, how many people have already got e-Residency?
So the program has been created in December 2014, and so far we have attracted 60,000 e-residents coming from 160 countries around the world.
That's quite a lot.
Not bad.
Gita, what about in Indonesia? You are from Indonesia. You haven't got citizenship in other countries. Have you?
No, I haven't.
And what's the policy in Indonesia? Anything to encourage young people to have citizens in other countries or to become global citizens?
I don't think there is a conscious policy nor encouragement for any Indonesian to embrace citizenship of other countries or regions. But I just want to basically go back to a couple of the comments made by Yoseph and Arnaud. If you take a look at, I was at a university campus a few days ago in some country, and we were, as adults, being asked, what is it that would keep you awake at night? The top 3 or 4 things. And amongst the adults, and I differentiate the adults from the millennials, because I think the millennials know a little bit more than the adults. What keeps us awake would be issues like the China-US trade tension, terror, or terrorism, or climate change. Then you compare that with the poll that would have been done with the millennials. This would have been done by the World Economic Forum quite recently. The top 3 issues with respect, or that are confronted, or that are feared by the millennials would have been climate change, number 1. And then conflicts or wars, number 2. Then it goes down the list, inequality and all that good stuff. And at the very bottom, it's actually economic opportunity, right? So economic opportunity stands at about number 12 or 13 of that top most feared issues amongst the millennials. And I think it relates to the ability for anybody to embrace global citizenship, right? Because citizenship, in a global sense, is about opportunities, and it's about opportunism, right? You can be opportunistic for the purpose of being included, participating in the economic narrative, social narrative, cultural narrative, but you will not be able to embrace global citizenship if opportunity in the economic sense is not being facilitated. So the objective is to make sure that economic opportunities as an issue should be at the bottom of the list as long as possible for global citizenship to work. At any rate, when it goes up to the top 3 of all issues that keep anybody awake, that's, I think, going to erode or undermine the ability for anybody to embrace global citizenship. Indonesia, in particular, has not been as open-minded as it should be in terms of embracing global talents. And that, I think, has something to do with the way conversations have gotten so polarized. And I don't say this in a unique sense. Yeah.
Do you think is that because of Indonesia have very large population in Southeast Asia? You are the most populated country in Southeast Asia.
It has 17,000 islands. It has a pretty unique kind of diversity that most countries don't have. But it also has certain issues like inequality. And I do kind of speculate or hypothesize here that I think inequality is a driver for the polarization of conversations around the world, be it in developed economies, developing economies, or even underdeveloped economies. And that has changed the game. That has changed the game and made it more difficult for people to actually embrace global citizenship, because people are moving way out to the right and to the left at the expense of the diminution of the center. And the diminution of the center, I think, makes it more difficult for anybody from Estonia, from New Zealand, Indonesia, Thailand, and all the rest to not only have a good understanding of what global citizenship is, but to actually come out with a policy posture that allows for global citizenship to take place in places or in the 195 countries that we have in this world.
Joseph, people may be thinking of global citizenship as utopia or positive thinking. Does it really exist in practice? And what should be done by other countries or by governments around the world to really put it in place?
Yeah, actually, to touch upon what you said about economic opportunity, the way I see it, and many of us here also see it, is to put it in black and white. There's the old economy and there's a new economy. In the old economy, we were taught that you get a job, do something, earn some money, and then use that to live a happy life, get a house, feed yourself. If you have extra, go travel, do fun things, and hopefully retire and sit down and look after your grandchildren. But that economy is collapsing. One, because it has created this belief that for us to keep doing that, we just got to keep growing and growing and growing. And we're reaching a stage where we can't sustain infinite growth. And on the other side, many people are doing things, but not really aligned with their own passions and drivers and motivations. So what we're seeing the new economy looking like is actually very much about global citizenship and the way we think about it, which is, I want to do things that add a positive societal value. And not just about making money and getting salary, but it's got to make a positive impact in people's lives. I want to be part of an economy. Many of us want to be part of economies that are doing positive things around the world. If you look at your house, the things that you have there, they come from all over the world. So many hands, so many countries have touched that. And at each step, we don't know what has been involved. Has there been child labor? Has there been ridiculous levels of pollution? Has there been slavery? Have there been wars? What are been the consequences that have been felt to get all the materials that we have, all the things that we have? So, the new generation that you're talking about, but it also includes all ages, is really hungry for a new economy that's focused around planetary and human well-being. And being part of that automatically makes us global citizens. Being part of being, such an economy makes us responsible.
Sorry to interject, but if you have a conversation with most of the guys in Silicon Valley, they have two distinct differences in terms of how they talk vis-a-vis some of us that would have gone to school in the 80s, right? We were taught with the notion that the idea of perfect competition would have been the ideal, but almost everybody at Silicon Valley embraces the notion of monopolistic behavior as if it's the only way to make a living, right? Not enough people talk about climate change as something that they would like to game change by way of using bytes. So that, I think, needs to change, because if climate change or the issue of climate change does not get addressed, it's going to take away everything else, whether you're a perfect economist or perfect competition economist or a monopolistic kind of economist. If you take a look at how much carbon is left, at the rate we're consuming on a daily basis, we only have a few decades left, and there's not enough techpreneurship that I think embrace or dwell within that area as for us to see scale in the near foreseeable future, as for everybody to be able to talk on a sustainable basis about global citizenship.
And hence also the fact that the model of the Silicon Valley is heavily criticized as well, because many of these companies don't address global issues. Many of these companies don't take questions like privacy or transparency very seriously. And this is why when we talk about global citizens, many of them are actually not in the Silicon Valley. Many of them are not going there. Sometimes they need to have access to VC funds, etc., so they may have to go. But otherwise, now global citizens are not actually in Silicon Valley, or they're not in Davos or anything. They're in Bangkok, in Chiang Mai, they are in Berlin, they're in Lisbon. They're traveling all around the world and trying to build an inclusive community and try to give back to the societies interested in this kind of global issues. So it's definitely not about the money. It's about sharing responsibility. I think it's one of the main challenges of our generation. Our generation realized that we can't solve global issues by being just nationalistic or nation focused. So this model of the Silicon Valley for that, raising massive funds, building big companies which end up being large monopolies, it's not the model which is sustainable. That's why it's very criticized nowadays.
But we are all confined by nation state, by law, national law.
Yeah.
And what's the difference between being national citizens and global citizens and being good citizen of the world?
Yes.
Is
you
that
don't have to choose. You don't have to choose, and that's the thing. Is that many people assume that identities must be exclusive. You're only defined by your own nationality, And that's it. But, I mean, I can feel closer to the other panelists, even if we don't have the same nationality, but because we would share similar values, etc. And at e-Residency, we don't ask people to choose to give up their citizenship.
So you mean global citizenship is in terms of identities?
Yeah, I mean, I personally believe, and we believe in Estonia, in multiple identities, in different layers of identities. The way you define yourself is not only because of your nationality. It's because what you believe in, what you feel close to, the kind of values you have, what you want to do with your life. And then you can adhere to different organizations, different government as well. I know it sounds weird, but you can follow other governments because you feel closer to these services or these governments.
What we see happening in the world right now is much bigger than any national boundaries. You talked about climate change. Climate change does not have boundaries. You talk about innovation ideas. Ideas are flowing freely, and there's no set of boundaries. We've got people here from all over the world who have come to this gathering and event. So the key thing about governments is governments tend to be 10, 20 years behind where a lot of the major conversations are, and that's just by the nature of government being a monopoly, and monopolies have inefficiencies and all those things. I think what's already happening, what we're seeing is, to tackle issues like climate change, there needs to be much deeper level of collaboration between people from different parts of the world, because if the problems that we face and the opportunities that we have are intricately interconnected with one another, then we got to connect with people who are different from us. And I think that's the opportunity for a lot of entrepreneurs here in Thailand and at Techsauce, is to think about how you can connect with people from other parts of the world who have experiences that are different from yours. When you do that, you're much more positioned to create the type of impact you want to see and to build innovations and companies. Silicon Valley is not going to solve any of our problems, and it's monoculture that it's creating. We need biodiversity. We need very diverse approaches to the solutions that we need in front of us.
In that case, does it mean that being global citizen means to bypass all the governments, all the boundaries, all the law, because it means that you can connect digitally by social network, by social media, and making movement. So you can bypass national government.
You still follow the law, right? You still respect the law.
Look, we're at a tech conference. We've spent the last 10 to 15 minutes on climate change, which I know many people in the audience don't think is important. But we're trying to say that it should be important, right? But there's a structural or fundamental issue. If you talk to most of the techpreneurs in Asia or Southeast Asia, they're backed by 5 to 7 year money, right? Whether it's a VC or a PE. But if you have a great idea in the US, you have a greater, or if not much greater chance of attaching that great idea to a 30-year money that comes from some pension funds, right? And that 30-year money allows you to be more patient, right? And to try to resolve or come up with a solution for something like a climate change, the conversation ought to be a 20, 30, 40-year span. It can't be a 5 to 7 year conversation, right? So there is a structural impediment in terms of our need or ability to get everybody or as many people as possible excited about doing something in the tech space for the purpose of resolving or solving the issue of climate change. Until and unless that gets changed, it's not going to get resolved. Until and unless that doesn't get, or that gets resolved, you can size up the limits with which the conversation around global citizenship, will be.
That's the one thing that we're actually doing in New Zealand with the Global Impact Visa. It's really tapping into talented people from around the world to work together on problems that no individual can do on their own. And I hope that can be an interesting model for how other countries tap into talent. We look at a place like Silicon Valley. More than 40% of startups there were founded by immigrants. More than 50% of Fortune 500 companies in the US were founded by immigrants. So if you're talking about innovation and even technology, already movement of people is integral to that. innovation happens at collision of different ideas. And you don't get collision of different ideas when we're all thinking the same way, when we're all looking the same. And so for any country that wants to be on the bandwagon of innovation, just even in general, global talent is critical. But that's not enough, I think, is what we're saying here. It's not enough to just be chasing innovation for the sake of innovation. The challenges that we have of climate change and deep level inequality demand even greater focus around it. And that's actually what brings people a lot closer together. And governments will adapt because they face the problems, they pay the big bills, and they also see the opportunity of doing so.
And contribution from this global impact visa means entrepreneurs who participate in this program will make contribution to the whole global society, not only in New Zealand.
Good question. So for us, we look at both in the same way. So to me, citizenship is about being a contributing member of a community. Right. And if a nation gives you a license to be there, you have to contribute. So we think about global citizenship, about freely moving around. It's actually not. It's really about responsibility. So with the Global Impact Visa, people build ideas and solutions in New Zealand, but on problems that have global applications. So the people working on plastic or on fashion industry, that there's no country that does fashion by itself or clothing. They all cross a lot of borders. So you got to think about what's happening on the other side. And so it's an interesting model for how a country is trying to be a global citizen as a nation, to be in service to the rest of the world.
Many governments assume that they have to choose between providing services to their own population or being inclusive with the rest of the world. And I think that's the major mistake, and that's what makes many governments try to prevent legal ways of immigrating and very proactive policies, because they assume that they're not going to be able to serve their own population. But there's no contradiction between being a global citizen and being interested in local issues. And actually, by having proactive policies, proactive initiatives like the one of Yoseph, you can also improve the situation in local communities, etc. By really embracing the idea that there's a global mobility, there's a competition for talents worldwide. People want to be mobile, they want to travel around the world, but then you need, as a government, you need to find some ways to get the better value and also help your own population and take advantage of it. So this is why proactive policies like startup visas, as we have in Estonia, like the e-Residency program, like what New Zealand government is doing, that's why it's particularly relevant, because mobility is a global trend. This is going to happen. Maybe you can postpone it, you can make sure your country is not going to benefit from this at all, but your neighbors are going to do it anyway. When you see what the Malaysian government is doing right now, Malaysian government is trying to attract entrepreneurs, is trying to attract digital nomads from around the world and facilitate having a visa, residency, etc. So this is a trend. So by building walls, by trying to prevent legal ways of immigrating, you just facilitate illegal work, and you just make sure that your own population is not going to get any benefits or opportunities out of it.
You were in Ankara group, you were in politics before.
Long time ago.
Yes, the Minister of Trade in Indonesia. But right now you have a program to encourage young people of Indonesia to have education internationally.
Right.
So what do you see as the seed of change coming from new generation in terms of caring more for global cause by being global citizen? But that means clash between global citizen and citizen of my nation. So what should be young generation thinking of this?
Well, I don't think the clash is only between anything at the global level vis-a-vis at the local level. The clash is also quite pervasive within localities, right? And this is, I think, the trouble that people don't know how to deal. The old days would have been many days of multilateralism. What we came up, in terms of the frameworks of the WTO, the APEC, even the climate proposal that came out of Paris, that's all being pushed aside because of local divergence, in political conversations, social conversations, and economic conversations. So as I alluded to earlier, the polarization of the conversation is making people go far out to the right and far out to the left at the expense of the center and centrality. And that, I think, causes difficulties for people to try to come up with some sort of a framework for global citizenship. You cannot realistically try to come up with a framework that would be the remedy or panacea for all kinds of problems, inclusive of global citizenship, if the conversations are polarized. And what would take many things to get that to be depolarized is for as many people to get a job as possible. And that requires, unfortunately or fortunately, industrialization. And we've only witnessed in the last 30 to 40 years industrialization taking at a large scale in places only like China. It's not even happening in Southeast Asia. It's not happening in many other places, much less the US. So until and unless that takes place, we're not going to see the creation of middle class that will entail enough stability as to basically try to see some hope for depolarizing the conversations, as for us to be able to see global citizenship coming to play in a good way.
I'm very sorry because we are running out of time. But to think of global citizenship, people may think that it belongs to new generation. But what is the mindset of more senior generation or older generation to be thinking that they can also be part of global citizenship?
Well, I think it's really about getting the younger generation as educated as possible so that they can bring about centrality to the table. And that, I think, requires, like it or not, bringing about economic prosperity for everybody through democratization of everything. But sometimes democratization is only defined by way of an election. And it's defined by way of the number of people that have access to mobile phones and internet. But it doesn't really yield, equality for everybody. As you would have seen, Gini ratios in developing economies and developed economies having gone up in the last 10 to 20 years. That's enough empirical evidence that's glaringly staring at us that needs to be fixed in an inevitable manner.
Okay, so that's all we have time for this panel discussion on global citizenship. Thank you very much for Arnaud, Gita, and Yoseph. Thank you very much.
Thank you.